Welcome everyone to the ORCRN's webinar Wednesday. This is a series we've been doing, I think, for the last couple of years now. Our last event took place in July. Had an amazing evening with a gentleman by the name of Elliot Moffat, who is a tribal member of the Nez Perce. We talked about the work that Elliot's doing in relation to rivers and water and other aspects of his people. Also got into the realm of rights of nature work, of which the Nez Perce tribe has put forward a resolution in regards to rights of nature. And it was just a really good conversation also just about the relationship to nature itself. And I think it's a good setup for tonight's conversation with our special guest. So thank you very much for joining. And as I put into chat, we do these kinds of events on a regular basis. We're also involved in a lot of other kind of trainings and awareness events. A lot of advocacy work through local action. The ORCRN has been around since 2014. If you want to find out more about the organization, if you're not familiar, you can go to the ORCRN.org. And as I also put in chat for those that have been around for the last couple minutes, these kinds of events happen because of a lot of dedicated volunteer hours, as well as donations. So if you're able to and ready, we'd be more than happy to take both people's time if they have it, as well as their monetary donations if they can so provide it. So I think with that kind of out of the way, I'd like to introduce our guest tonight, Will Falk. Will wears a lot of different hats, and I think he would attest pretty much simultaneously. Versus sort of a break in between. Will is an attorney, an activist, an author. The ORCRN had the pleasure of hosting Will actually prior to the coming of the COVID pandemic in 2020, who gave a series of talks in some different communities on a book he wrote called How Dams Fall. If you've had an opportunity to read it, I really recommend it. And perhaps, Nancy, you can put a link into Will's website, into that book itself. It's, I think, also a good setup to tonight's conversation that Will and I are going to engage in. So Will and I spoke last week a little bit about what we wanted to cover. I think we have kind of a general loose framework of sorts about how things will move tonight. So based on that, I think it's going to be a pretty rich and engaging conversation. So we'll kind of go at it for 45 minutes, 50 minutes or so, maybe an hour, and then turn it over to you to see if you have any questions or comments. If things pop up as we're talking, Nancy Ward, who you may see on your screen there, will kind of collect those kind of questions or comments, and we'll get to it after Will and I kind of have our back and forth here. So Will, welcome to the ORCRN's webinar Wednesday. Our kind of general theme tonight is our relationship to nature. Yeah, before I kind of get into sort of a prompting kind of question, anything you want to say to sort of start the evening off?
I'm really happy to be here, and I'm really happy to see so many people. And I'm really honored that y'all would ask me to come and ask me to share my thoughts.
Great. I've known you a few years now, Will, and got to spend a little bit of time with you, and I've read your book, and tracking a lot of your sort of current work through the activism and legal work that you've been involved with down in Nevada there, which we'll, I'm sure, get into in some detail as we go on. But as someone who's perhaps had it always in him, or is sort of always searching for sort of the pathways and how to kind of, be a whole human being, I suppose. With that, I'm guessing, knowing you a little bit, that a big piece of that is just really understanding your own place, sort of with nature, and I guess as nature. And be curious just to see, as even in the last couple of years, how they've unfolded, or even a longer trajectory, what does that look like for you, or how would you articulate that? Or, if someone asks you the question, what's your connection to nature, is kind of usually a common one that people will say, which, one can take one way or the other. But yeah, just kind of curious, as we've sort of led to tonight's conversation and event, yeah, how would you kind of let others know sort of where you're at and that kind of reality of you as a human being and being on this planet and nature itself and seeing and experiencing what you have?
Yeah, that's a really great question. Um, I think, for me, all of my work starts from a recognition that the natural world gives all life, and every living being on Earth depends upon this interdependent web of relationships that we call nature, and those relationships are truly what make life possible and what give us life. Um, and when I recognize things like that, I feel a intense desire to protect those relationships, to ensure that um, those relationships can continue, and ensure that those relationships have what I would call kind of the basic materials that all of life depend upon. Um, and recognizing that, I think it's only a half step away from recognizing how many of those relationships, how much of the natural world is under direct attack, and recognizing the need to do whatever we can to protect the natural world and protect the relationships that give us life. I certainly did not always think about it in those terms. I do have a personal story about how I decided to really devote my life to environmental activism. And I guess that story is kind of intertwines some of the themes that we'll be talking more about tonight. So um, people often ask me, well, how did you get into environmental activism, or how did you decide to do the things that you do? And I really had kind of an epiphany moment. I went to law school at the University of Wisconsin in Madison, and that was right after I graduated from college, and I was very much more thinking in the social justice frame about how I can use my law degree and my law license to help human people. And I designed my track in law school to be a public defender. Everything I did in law school was to be a public defender, and I felt like being a public defender would be a great way to fight back against one of the most racist systems in the United States, which is the criminal justice system. And I thought that representing poor people accused of crimes would be a way that I could push back against this racism. I'm somebody that from the time I was 19, I was diagnosed with major depression, and I've lived my whole adult life with major depression. And one of the things I wish I would have thought about more was the fact that depression is often exacerbated by stress, or is even caused by the exposure to too much stress. So I picked, the least stressful job I could think of, being a public defender. That's a joke. It was the most stressful job I've ever had. But I became a public defender right after I graduated, and I'm not a naturally very confrontational person, which is not a good quality to have if you're going to be a public defender, a criminal defense lawyer, where to protect your client's rights, you have to be very adversarial and confrontational. Also, the caseload was really high, and I burned out spectacularly. Finally, I ended up trying to kill myself. That was how my work as a public defender ended. I tried to kill myself, and Um, I spent about 10 days after I tried to kill myself. You can be involuntarily committed to a psych ward, as I was, and I happened to be committed to the St. Francis of Assisi Mental Health Hospital in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. St. Francis, in the Catholic tradition, is the patron saint of animals and often associated with the natural world. But I spent a lot of time watching Lake Michigan from this upper story of the mental health hospital. And when I got out of the hospital, I lived right next to Lake Michigan, and I went every day for several hours and just hung out by Lake Michigan. There was this rock that was kind of shaped like a couch, and if I put my jacket on it, I could make a little bed. And I would just listen to the lake, listen to the birds, listen to the way the breeze stirred in the grasses, listen to the insects. And in that way, I really calmed my mind and started to recover from that. And while I was doing that, I realized that Lake Michigan, those birds, the insects, the breeze, the sound of the waves on the sandy shores of Lake Michigan, all of that truly gave me something to live for. And as I went through my ups and downs, saved my life thinking of those things. So I realized that, the natural world is always giving me life. The natural world always ensures I have something to eat. I have water to drink. I have air to breathe. And now the natural world is offering me something, I guess, more spiritual that is sustaining and creating my life. And when I felt that, I immediately felt a corresponding desire to reciprocate that. With so much of the natural world under attack, when I fell in love with the natural world, I realized that I couldn't claim to love the natural world if my beloved was under assault and I wasn't fighting back with everything I have to stop that. So that was really the experience where I decided I was going to devote my life to doing whatever I can to protect the natural world. And that was about 10 years ago. And I've been trying to do that ever since.
That's super interesting. I mean, I've known some aspects of your background and sort of your journey, but there were some interesting things that just struck me in what you just said, Will, which, I mean, it really explains your own involvement, for instance, in the Colorado River lawsuit to get the river to be able to be heard, not so much to speak for the river, but how can humans hear the river. Your work that you've been diving into and sort of trying to understand and feel the Ohio River and the work that you were engaged in there before you kind of got catapulted into a different realm of sort of risk, listening to and advocating for nature and really all the species associated, including the human species itself. And yeah, I mean, it explains a lot of kind of what I've come to learn from you and learn from you over the last couple of years of getting to know you. And I'm wondering if I could have you sort of take what you just explained in the sense of your own journey and sort of apply that in a way that, what is your perspective right now of kind of where we sit collectively? Because I think you've also understanding that despite our own cathartic moments, our own journeys, our own sort of ability to be stable and holistic and sort of in rhythm with the natural world, that it's going to take a collective to actually deal with some pretty stark realities. And, maybe in that kind of a question, what are you seeing that still either feels dark or frustrates you? And then maybe what feels lighter and sort of brighter for you in the sense of what you're seeing out there, if there's stuff like that. So yeah, I mean, just be interesting to get your perspective again. You've touched on your journey's touched on a lot of things of which affect things that are larger than just you. And so I know you've you've at least had some observational position in different ways, and just curious to see what your perspective is on sort of, and it could be local, you know, internationally, regionally, whatever you want, and take it from any vantage, but it's going to take more than just you and the people here tonight. So what does that look like? What doesn't feel right to you still? And maybe what feels, I don't want to use the word hopeful, but what feels promising, I suppose.
Yeah, I think whenever we're going to talk about where we are collectively, I think we have to begin that conversation in what's actually happening for the natural world, what's really going on out in the real world, out in the natural world. And we have to evaluate any progress or any setbacks or any, you know, devolution from this understanding of where the natural world stands at any given time that we're talking. And I think, you know, it's really it's really important to understand that things are really, really bad right now. You know, there's all kinds of horrible stats that I can cite, and I will, you know, scientists are saying that 100 species are being pushed to extinction every single day. That scientists also say that we're in the midst of the 6th mass extinction. It's a mass extinction event that is happening much faster than the previous 5 extinction events. It's an extinction event where extinction is happening at 1,000 times faster than natural extinction rates happen. You know, we can talk about things like however many acres of old growth forests are lost every second. We can talk about how much fresh water is being used and lost and converted into unusable water. And we have to talk about all of those things, because if we don't have those things, or if we get to a point where the natural world cannot heal herself from these things, then we can't, this conversation is going to be very temporary, very temporary before there is no real world to have this conversation in. I find that oftentimes when we're talking about our movements, we often are, you know, very future looking, and we look at where is this point of no return? How many parts per million greenhouse gas emissions do we have to keep things under? How many degrees Celsius above the baseline do we have to keep things under? And I find that overlooks the fact that every second that's passing right now, while the dominant culture rages on, is a massive defeat, is a massive tragedy, and ultimately undermines any success that we have as it goes on. It's like if you lived in a house with 10 of your family members, and every week one more of your family members got killed. Yes, you're going to celebrate when you stop them from killing the 8th family member. But once you stop that killing, there's going to be a lot of grief for those 7 family members that were killed. And I truly feel like that's the point where we're at with the natural world. We're losing so much. And so we have to get really effective really quickly. And I think we have to always keep that, you know, front and center in our minds as we're evaluating our movements and evaluating our strategies and tasks. So that's the really bad stuff, and the really dark stuff. I do think that in some ways we have to individually learn how to confront that and deal with that. I'm not saying that we have to live in this despair all the time, but I am saying that we can use these things to fuel our actions and fuel an urgency, and we can start to use that darkness as a way to fight back more effectively. What was the other part of the question, Kai?
The inverse, so sort of from dark to kind of light. I mean, and clearly there's there's something that, you spoke to it earlier about sort of your cathartic moment and sort of your connection to the natural world. And I think, getting into that you're part of the natural world, and you have a responsibility for it, and, that drives you. So yeah, I mean, there's clearly something still driving you to be present and involved and active and aware. Just wondering, like, where else you're seeing that kind of, I guess, good vibration of sorts, whether it's in small amounts or in larger amounts. I mean, it doesn't really matter in my mind, the kind of magnitude, but where else? Because again, if it's going to be about a collective, somehow those energy points have to kind of coalesce at some point down the line to become more effective. And yeah, just if you have little antidotes, little sort of even stories, little moments, either from something current or that you've read, or yeah, just kind of what you're seeing in the current sort of near view, or maybe stuff that's even on that horizon level.
The things that the things that I don't want to say give me hope. I don't really like hope. I think hope could be a problem, but the things that give me strength are walking down a sidewalk in a city and seeing tree roots tear up the sidewalk. Seeing those videos of eagles attacking drones in the air, seeing the videos of sharks tearing up underground cables in the ocean, underwater cables, reading reports of how much damage to industrial infrastructure rats by themselves do every single year. And my point is the natural world is fighting like hell, as hard as the natural world can, against all this destruction. So we have a whole world of allies out there that are doing everything they can to ensure that this beautiful planet that we live on can survive. And I think that can be such an encouraging and strengthening thing if you go and build your own personal relationship with the natural world. I believe that sooner or later you'll come to understand that the natural world is full of these other beings that are communicating with each other, can communicate with us, have their own amazing roles to play in all of this. And I think you'll realize that the natural world is full of your kin, of truly your family members, of your close friends. And it gives me strength to think that I can go out and stand on the side of those sharks ripping up the cables. I can go out and see my friends, the trees, trying to rip up whatever asphalt they can. And it makes the world a lot less lonely place for me. And it gives me a really camaraderie feeling that our comrades are surrounding us. And the dominant culture wants us to think that the world is just full of objects, is just full of things that humans can use to try and make their lives a little easier, a little more comfortable. And that's a really lonely world to live in. But if our world is filled with other warriors that are fighting next to us, our friends and family, who really want us to live and live in a good way, strength is from their examples and the knowledge that they're out there fighting as well.
I was kind of chuckling because we both approached the word hope and then we backed away quickly from it. So I might come back to that later to see, have people kind of hear your take on why that sort of term may not be the term we want to be using, and sort of strength and promise, and maybe better ways to sort of figure out how we kind of find good energy. I mean, this is all kind of nicely leading up to sort of a lot of your current reality, in the sense of that camaraderie and why you do what you do. I think it's hugely instructive of a lot of realms of sort of human endeavors that have been foundationally flawed. And what I'm getting at is there's this the best way I've kind of put in my own head, and you might have a better way, is there's a new gold rush of a huge magnitude underway, and it's basically to electrify the planet. And the way of which most people, at least, are being sort of connected to that is, dump your gas powered car and buy an electric one because it's better for the planet is the basic pitch at the end. You're really on the front line, so the idea of not waiting, but you really dug into something and sort of kind of in an immediate sort of realm, and found yourself in a lot of different ways through a lot of different hats you're wearing and engaged in that reality. And so it'd be great for people to kind of hear some of the details around that. But I think in the context again of, you and I also spoke that so much of human existence, at least human existence of kind of a Western construct in the last few hundred years, is really about what can we take from nature. It's not even really living from nature in a harmonious way. It's what can we take from it for our own sort of benefit and pleasure and convenience, completely forgetting about that we actually live in nature, we live with nature, and we live as nature, to kind of circle back to your own kind of therapy that nature provided for you. We're so removed from that. We're really much in this realm of just taking from nature, and this rush to electrify the planet, of which you found yourself again sort of in the front line with a key element to that, which is about lithium mining. Just there's so many things that are instructive about that reality today, that kind of giving people a sense of what that's looked like for you, how you got kind of involved in that realm, and just some of the baseline kind of set up for some other conversation points we'll get into kind of post that kind of scene setting.
Would this be a good time to kind of explain my involvement in Thacker Pass and how that got going?
Yeah, I think that's a great point, just because you talked earlier about so many things seem so far out that we sort of forget the now, that somehow we're all building for something further out versus realizing there's shit that needs to get done now. And I felt like that was a should have to get things done now kind of moment for you. So
yeah, so I've been involved in a campaign for almost 2 years now. It's a campaign to stop a massive open pit lithium mine from destroying a beautiful mountain pass in northern Nevada called Thacker Pass. In English, it is called Pahimaha in the local Paiute dialect. But I got involved in this campaign. I was first introduced to it through my dear friend Max Wilbert, who co-wrote a book called Bright Green Lies, which is about analyzing whether all of these so-called green energies that we're being sold right now. It's a book that asks, well, how green are they? What would this really mean? And Max had been working on that book for a few years, and he had read about this massive lithium mine that was kind of starting the permitting process in northern Nevada. And Max and I had both spent a lot of time camping in the Great Basin on different campaigns within the Great Basin, and it's a region that we both really love. And so in 2020, in the fall of 2020, Max went out to Thacker Pass and just went and was kind of looking around, and I happened to see him a couple weeks later at a friend's Thanksgiving thing that we were doing, and he said, I want to talk to you about this. And he kind of started describing it to me, and he said, he's like, I really want to do something. And I've been involved in several, I guess you'd call frontline land defense campaigns. I spent about a year in Canada um, at a indigenous cultural center that's also a pipeline blockade. It's called the Unistoten Camp up in British Columbia. It's a camp that is blocking, I think at last count, 6 oil pipelines from taking oil from the tar sands in Alberta over to the coast of BC, where they would be um, refined and sold to markets. And I saw there at the Unistoten camp how a few people with very little resources who were strategically placed and using what legal tools they had at their disposal, how they were able to hold off this construction for years. You know, people with very few resources going up against, you know, the Canadian state and a bunch of very powerful corporations. I also spent after that, I went up and lived at a construction blockade at the top of Mauna Kea in Hawaii. Mauna Kea is the most sacred place in the world, or one of the most sacred places in the world to Native Hawaiians. And they want to put a big telescope up there. Again, Hawaiians successfully blocked the only access road up to that construction site, and were able to hold off that construction. And to this day, that 30-meter telescope still hasn't been built. So when Max was describing Thacker Pass, I was kind of asking him, was like, what's the road situation like? Like, how do you get into this camp? And as he was talking about it, it seemed like it could be possible that we could do something similar. If we could tie up a road for long enough, maybe we could directly stop this construction from happening. So Max told me he was going to go set up camp in Thacker Pass, and I kind of was thinking about it and figured I couldn't let one of my best friends go freeze his ass off on the side of a mountain by himself. Um, um, I think I originally told him that I could give him 2 or 3 weeks. I was really into this Ohio River riding project that I was doing, and I said then I'd have to get back to the Midwest. Um, I was there for a couple weeks, and then I was there for a couple months, and now it's been almost 2 years. But you know, I consider myself a biophilic activist, which means that I put the needs of the land above the needs of anything else. And that includes the needs of some human beings. And I don't think that you can make any case that an open pit mine is good for any natural creature, any sage grouse, any sagebrush, any pronghorn antelope, any mule deer, any Mormon cricket. There's just nothing good about an open pit mine. And yet this seems to be this kind of electric cars are going to save the planet. You know, green extraction is going to save the planet. Is, you know, looking at the environmental movement today, this is a Kool-Aid that has totally taken over the environmental movement. People seem to be falling for this hook, line, and sinker. And we wanted to both, you know, set up some sort of blockade if we could, but also force a broader conversation about, you know, what would it actually mean to create all these electric cars that the current presidential administration is talking about. You know, what is actually involved in lithium mining. And we felt like that could be best achieved by actually being in Thacker Pass. So we went and set up camp on January 15th, 2021. That was the same day that the Bureau of Land Management issued the final record of decision permitting the Thacker Pass mine. And one of our very first goals was we wanted people to fall in love with Thacker Pass. We wanted to show people how beautiful this place is. So many people think of Nevada as just an empty desert, and nothing could be further from the truth. The sagebrush steppe that is Thacker Pass is beautiful and is teeming with life, and deserves to be protected, just like another more sexy ecotypes like redwood forests or something. But we lived in Thacker Pass for most of last year. At first, I often describe myself as a self-hating lawyer. I don't often enjoy practicing law. But we realized that despite there being litigation against the Bureau of Land Management for the Thacker Pass mine, no one was arguing the interests of Native Americans. And Thacker Pass includes many historic properties that are significant to Native folks in the region. And it is actually the site of 2 massacres. So this mine will destroy 2 massacre sites. So recognizing that this was no one was representing these arguments for Native Americans, I agreed to represent the Reno Sparks Indian Colony in litigation against the Thacker Pass mine. And we are primarily arguing over cultural resources that will be destroyed. I can get into all the legal stuff, Kai. There's, I think there's some eye-opening lessons from this.
Yeah, I think it'd be great to, if you can kind of think through some of like the kind of the most instructive realities there. Again, when I said instructive, even before we started this, there's so many aspects of it that are sort of classic, unfortunate textbook realities of just the faultiness of the system and its orientation, sort of, man over nature, man taking from nature, legally protecting property over really the inherent rights of the natural world, as you spoke to, let alone that of the rights of the first peoples of that area. It's all stuff that the ORCRN is engaged in since its inception. The Community Environmental Legal Defense Fund, CELDEF, and its collaborative work with ORCRN. And I know that Terry Lodge, another attorney, has been working with you on the legal cases. And so here you are and others sort of, really in some ways, at the heart of just sort of the rottenness of what is, and then trying to do something good with something that's inherently bad. That's as simply, I can't put it more simple than that. And so, but I think it'd be good for people to kind of hear, like, what does that really mean in the sense of some of that legal work that you're engaging in, and how that even spills into some of the cultural realities. Again, we spoke about how let's electrify the planet, or the fact that one of the universities in that area is touting the greatness of lithium, and it's somehow this new way to maybe get donors to donate to the university, as they're basically funding something that is about undermining life itself, and they're using that for profit, basically. So anyway, there's so many different things that we can go through, but yeah, maybe kind of picking out a couple of good kernels of the different things you've come across that kind of are instructive to not just the lithium situation and mining, but really how that's representative of so many other aspects of that current dominant culture that you spoke to earlier.
Yeah. Let me start off with saying that part of being a self-hating lawyer is my own recognition that law cannot save the planet, and law will not save the planet, at least law as it's currently conceived of. And the Thacker Pass campaign, I think, is a perfect example. And I think, one of the common response is, well, if you don't believe that law can save the planet, why do you practice law? Again, the Thacker Pass campaign, I think, gives us a good way to think about this. If the Thacker Pass lithium mine would be developed exclusively on federal public land administered by the Bureau of Land Management. This is the land that we are told is being held for the public's benefit. This is the land, the classic BLM land that everybody knows when they're driving through the West, that they can just pull over and camp on BLM land, because after all, it's public land, so we own it. This is a common thing that you hear people talk about, especially in the West, but it's actually not true. So in the case of BLM administered land and other federal public lands, anyone that is seeking to stop mines through the legal process on public land is very quickly going to encounter what's called the 1872 General Mining Law. The 1872 General Mining Law was indeed passed in 1872, and it's still on the books. It was passed to help the federal government pay for the Civil War. The federal government was in real debt, and they realized that perhaps selling cheap mining claims in the West, as the country was expanding in the 1860s, there was all this quote unquote empty land. The only people that lived out there were Native Americans, and of course, as everyone in the government knew back then, they're not really people. So we will sell these cheap mining claims as a way to pay off the Civil War debt. As part of that, though, Congress legislated that the highest and best use of federal public land is mining. So in other words, people can use federal public land until a mining corporation puts a mining claim on that land, and American law will protect that mining claim over any other use of the land. And yes, that does include Native American sacred uses, ceremonial uses. There are many, many examples, many famous cases in environmental and what they call Indian law, where tribes have told the federal government, this is literally the most sacred place in the world. And the courts, the judges shrug and say, well, we're really sorry about that, but there has to be a separation of church and state in our government. And if we protected your sacred sites, we couldn't have mining, we couldn't have logging, we couldn't have all kinds of other extraction. So we will not protect your ceremonial sites. That's really, this is a really important point, because the 1872 mining law means that when corporations stake a valid mining claim and when they propose projects like the Thacker Pass lithium mine, the Bureau of Land Management and other agencies like the Forest Service, they are obligated to give those permits. It is not a situation where if literally every single person that lived around Thacker Pass, if everyone in the Kings River Valley, if everyone in Orovada, which is a tiny little town next to Thacker Pass, if everyone in Humboldt County, Nevada voted and said, we absolutely do not want this mine, that would not stop the mine. The government would still be obligated in issuing that permit. And as long as the corporation could propose a project that would fit within existing regulations, that permit has to go in. So, even our litigation right now against the Bureau of Land Management is the best that we can hope for is that a judge would suspend the Thacker Pass permit But that suspension would come with conditions that if the mining corporation, Lithium Nevada, met those conditions, and the Bureau of Land Management went back and corrected its earlier permitting process, then the permit would be reinstated and Lithium Nevada would be given the green light to start its extraction. So, if you're thinking in the more traditional legal mindset, maybe the more traditional environmental activist mindset, environmental activists often hold up all these amazing laws, like, or what they're told as are amazing laws, like, we've got the Clean Water Act, we've got the Endangered Species Act, we've got the National Environmental Policy Act. Look at how much progress we've made. None of that has changed the fact that we're destroying the land at an intensifying pace. But none of those laws apply to a place like Thacker Pass. At least they don't apply in a way that could stop the project. So, in the traditional legal mindset, the people would say, well, if you don't like the 1872 mining law, you got to change the 1872 mining law. Changing the 1872 mining law would take an act of Congress. And if you were stepping into that arena and seriously thinking that you were going to change the 1872 mining law, you would be fighting with one of the most powerful industries in the United States and their lobbyists. You would be fighting with a mining industry that has, at this point, made literally trillions of dollars off of extracting resources from places like Thacker Pass, off of destroying the land. I don't think that it's reasonable to think that we could go into Congress and get Congress to undermine a significant part of the American economy, get Congress to pass a law that revokes the 1872 mining law and makes it so that other uses of the land trump mining. And the reason for that is, again, because mining corporations make their wealth off of extracting minerals from the land. In other words, they make their wealth off of destroying the land. This isn't exclusive to the mining industry. In fact, the whole global economy is based off of extraction, and capitalism itself is based off of turning the natural world into products. So American politicians, American legislatures, and the American judicial system are very well aware that limiting corporate access to extraction means destroying the economy, means undermining the ability of corporations to access the wealth that they depend on. And in a time when we all know that wealth is power, what you're really doing, if you were going to expect the American government to change something like the 1872 mining law, what you're really saying to them is you need to restrict corporate access to corporate power. And corporations get their power from exploiting the land, destroying the land. That's quite literally where they get their power from. And I simply don't think it's realistic to think that we're ever going to convince the American government or any major world government to do anything that seriously restricts corporations' ability to destroy the land for profit and power. So we can maybe take a breather there.
Well, yeah, I mean, yeah, it's fascinating as we've talked here tonight and leading up to tonight when we talked last week about kind of the realities of sort of what you're here you are almost in the role you were at back in Wisconsin. You're trying to not publicly defend in the traditional term of public defender, but you're trying to defend Mother Earth, defend the customary ways of First Peoples that lived a much more harmonious existence with the natural world. Yet you don't only have one arm tied behind your back, you're kind of being dismembered as you're you're trying to move ahead, meaning like there's nothing for you to really work with, because it's, again, it's the orientation of what it's aiming for is so off of the advocacy of what is right that they just don't match up. And I think you're absolutely spot on in the sense of how do you appeal to the system that has it exists because of all of that, and then you're in a situation when you were talking about everything you were coming up against. I started to think about the political parties. I mean, you pretty much must have almost unanimous agreement amongst the two dominant political parties in the realm of this let's electrify the planet stuff, because you know those who are themed or dubbed conservatives or Republicans or whatever want it because they've always been known sort of as pro-business and pro-capitalist, and the other group, the Democrats, like it because it somehow can be shown that this is good for the environment. So somehow there's like this win-win going on, this narrative, um, which kind of leads me maybe to kind of the lead in to maybe see what others here tonight have to say or questions they may have for you, Will. But you know, we kind of started with sort of this idea of relationship, whether it's individual, whether it's collective, and ultimately, what is it going to take, to sort of really shift or transform or bear down on the realities here. And I know at the ORCRN and at CELDEF even, we've talked much more frequently about culture and collective behavior, and law is really just an outgrowth of a different value system, and then that just sort of gets reinforced, and we know we need to break that. So I guess as you've thought about it, as you've read about it, as you've written about it, as you're immersed in it as an activist and as an attorney, like those realms of sort of culture and behavior and ability to sort of break through or not be sort of swept up by sort of these one for one replacements. We live this fossil fuel existence, and now we're being told, hey, with solar, wind, and electricity, we can have the same existence we have, but in this different way, as if it just can somehow be swapped, that it's just coming from somewhere else without the realization of everything you've laid out, in the sense that, no, it's just the same old thing, with a different coat of paint almost. Yeah, so just kind of maybe leading into back to that kind of relational place, yeah, just however that may strike you. And I may have gone off in some kind of weird ways, but if there's something there to pull on, please. If there's not, just throw something else in the mix.
Yeah, I guess one of the things I heard, or one of the responses I have, I realized that I just went on for a while about how, working through the traditional legislative processes probably is not going to be a solution. And, also will take a really long time where we'll continue to lose more of the natural world while we're doing that. So, the question is, okay, well, why, if we understand that, why would we ever engage in the legal system? Why would you ever practice law? And I think, I think that while a lot of people sort of intellectually understand this, there are a host of reasons why people don't break out of these strategies into different strategies. One of them is simply just, when you're trying to stop a mine, what's the first thing that people think of? They think of lawsuits. So there's sort of this cultural inertia within the movement that gets set up. But then it's also, people are really scared about other kinds of tactics. There's a host of reasons why people keep going back to the same well that has clearly dried up centuries ago. But I think that one of the things that I try and use this whole experience of going through a whole lawsuit, a whole court case with clients, and I try and explain to them the limitations of our strategy, the limitations of law. I explained to them that, like in the Thacker Pass thing, there's going to be a time, if we could succeed in delaying this permit for a year or two, that would be a huge success. But there is going to be a time when Lithium Nevada has done everything it needs to do. And as long as its shareholders are still willing to put up the money to create this mine, they're going to do that. And this tactic will reach its limitation. But I still do it because I think that you can use the legal system to illustrate a deeper point. Law is nothing more than a justification for the application of power. That's the definition I came up with. Law is nothing more than a justification for the application of power. And what do I mean by that? You know, if there was a law that would allow us to cancel the Thacker Pass mine, or if we were successful in getting a real suspension or revocation, temporary revocation of this permit, if Lithium Nevada went out there to start digging, all we would have to do is call the court or call the police and say, look, they're violating a court order, and the judge would order armed men and women to go out to the mine site and stop Lithium Nevada from doing what they're doing. Of course, we know the same thing is true when we go out there and try and actually protect a mine site. If we go out there and put our bodies in front of the construction equipment, it's not going to be very long before those same armed men and women, those cops, come with their guns and their weapons and remove us. And the justification, the authorization for that would be the whole legal system that gives authority and the physical muscle to assert that authority to remove us. So the question that I always like to pose to people is, if we know that law is simply the justification of the application of power, and what if we started thinking about the power that we have, and what if we start cutting out the middleman? Do we actually need to go to a judge and ask the judge to issue an opinion that we're right, that it's wrong to destroy a mountain pass? Or can we skip that step and realize, you know, armed men and women aren't the only ones that can use physical force? And how do we just figure out how to go out and protect the places that need to be protected? And at this point, how do we protect the whole planet, the only planet in the known universe that supports life? You know, do we start to think that perhaps law and lawsuits are not the only tactic that we have on the table? And how do we have a sober and rational discussion about what it would take to actually use the power that we have to stop these projects? And I find that even though people intellectually might understand this, they have to actually go through the process and see a judge dash their dreams and watch a judge allow the destruction of places and people and beings that they love, before they'll have the anger, before they'll have you know, the willingness to think about you know, doing what needs to be done.
Yeah, I mean, I think again, the experience of the community rights world is right at that position, in the sense of, you know, we need to expand our capability and sort of the tactics and strategy beyond just the engagement of the process as is, because there's just too many pieces of evidence that show that we're going to be blocked, we're going to be stunted, we're going to be, in some cases, made irrelevant if we keep doing that. As you also mentioned, there's maybe merits here and there to engage almost tactically in a sort of a guerrilla warfare style, but what else are we adding to our capability to do that now protection that ultimately can lead to sort of deeper transformational reality? I mean, obviously there are places of which have made attempts now to kind of shift their orientation within sort of Western legal structure, you know, whether it's been Ecuador with their rights of nature provisions and some kind of promising legal cases that we've also been speaking about in the community rights world, is, Chile getting to the point of considering a very different kind of constitution, whether it went far enough or in the right direction or not. The only reason that it came to that was for the very reasons you just described, where people just said, screw it, because the official legal means said that they couldn't do what they were doing, but they knew they needed to get on the streets. They knew that they needed to protest. They needed to confront those armed forces that were telling them no, because that's the power and the energy that was necessary to kind of get to that moment of this reconsideration, despite the vote going the way that it did at the beginning of the month. But, and we have that in our own history, yet it's not there yet, despite all the needs for that energy to be there. So I agree that we've got to somehow engage with that, get more comfortable with that. And some of it's scarier than shit. That's not going to go away. But what's the alternative? You described earlier species extinction loss at the rate that it is. I mean, how is that not scary and frightening? So yeah, I think that kind of relationship piece is a big one and sort of important sort of for that cultural movement that's needed. We're kind of at a point where I know Nancy put some things in chat about inviting people to kind of throw some questions out. I've seen one so far. Luis asked here, Will says, is there a huge amount of water needed daily for this mine that is needed more urgently elsewhere? So I guess kind of specifically to the kind of the water question, what is it looking like, or what would it look like if that mine went into sort of full operation?
I don't know what this comes down to daily. This might be out there, but once the mine is up and running, it will use 5,200 acre feet of water. That's a massive amount of water. And this is in a water management unit that they've been saying is overdrawn by 30,000 acre feet. So if a basin is already overdrawn and you're taking 30,000 acre feet of water out per year, more than can be replenished, and then you add another 52, so 35,000 acre feet of water, basic arithmetic will tell you that at some point you will draw all that water out of the basin. And then the second part of that question, is this mine water needed more urgently elsewhere? And I really don't mean this as a flippant response, but especially with something like water, there's no surpluses in nature. Everyone uses what's there, whether we're talking about the sagebrush, the grasses, the insects, the fish, the snails in Thacker Pass. All of that water is needed where the water already is by countless creatures. And this is a principle that we can apply to any issue. If you are extracting too much from the earth, then it can replenish. Those communities, those natural communities can't recover. And that's because nature has no surpluses. Everyone uses everything where it is. And everything is always needed where it is.
Yeah, thanks for that. There was another question that got thrown in there about your own. I mean, you kind of showed up and participated in the Thacker Pass reality as in a way to be an aid, but you were also sort of thrust into the middle of it with some pretty hefty fines levied against you and Max. And just, I guess the question is, where does that sit currently? And if you can explain just in brief what I mean by that. And then I think also put it in context about how easy it is for the system to just mess with little old Will Falk in a quick manner, yet it will open up the doorways and then some for the corporate entity without barely an obstruction. So like just the asymmetrical reality of power that you were speaking to earlier.
Yeah, so Thacker Pass is about 20 miles from the nearest publicly accessible bathroom that's at a gas station 20 miles away. And because we started to see many Native American and especially Native American elders coming out to Thacker Pass to engage in ceremony. Some of those elders were explaining that there's more elders that would come if there were outhouses here. You know, it can be when sometimes when an elderly person has to go to the bathroom, they need to go right now. And they didn't have, you know, they don't have time to drive all the way back to that gas station. So we built a couple pit outhouses, very primitive. I think they were like 6-foot holes. And we put them right where the open pit would be. And about a week after we filed our first filings in the lawsuit, BLM cops came up to me in Thacker Pass and hand delivered a fine threat. They originally threatened us between $50,000 and $75,000 worth of fines because we allowed these outhouses to be built without permits. So we took those outhouses down, but that did not end up mattering. They still fined us just shy of $50,000. It was like $49,841 or something like that. And there's a couple of funny things about this. One of them is that the law that they use to fine us with says that the Bureau of Land Management can collect double the fair market rental value of the property that we deprived them of their use. So by building these outhouses, we deprived them of something crazy like 0.001 acre of land. And we've gotten all the BLM's logs and spreadsheets, and they calculated that we deprived them of about $12.40 of fair market rental value for those outhouses in Thacker Pass. But the law also allows them to collect administrative charges for investigating this great outhouse debacle, and they decided that that costs $49,800. So they spent $49,800 to investigate us for $12.40 of deprived profits. And I like to say that the lesson here is that if you're a corporation under American law, you're allowed to shit all over the land. If you are a human being, you are not allowed to shit on the land. And if your shit is full of toxic carcinogens and forever kind of chemicals and toxins, that's totally fine. But if your shit is just human shit, that is not allowed on American public land. But yeah, we've been fined. We are currently in the process of appealing that through what's called the Interior Board of Land Appeals. And the Interior Board of Land Appeals famously does not have very many deadlines within their own system of law. And who knows when they're going to make a ruling, but we have to get a ruling from them before we can appeal it to an actual judge. So right now I owe the federal government $49,800 for some outhouses, where they're going to put a massive open pit, by the way.
Yeah, the irony is, I don't even know what the word is. It's yeah, it's quite crazy when I remember the story coming down. Yeah, I didn't realize the kind of the value of lost money and the administrative expense sort of breakdown. So it makes it even worse than the one set fee. But yeah, there was Louise had put a kind of a follow up to her question in chat. I don't know if you saw that, Will. If there was more you wanted to respond to that, where she writes that.
I didn't mean take it from the animals. I meant, don't the ranchers need it and the people who live along the Quinn River? That's what I meant.
Yeah, that's a great question, especially about the ranchers, because what we are finding is that the ranchers absolutely know what's going to happen. They know that the water is going. I think there's kind of something of a misconception of ranchers. You know, these aren't like the cowboys that you see in the movies. These are usually wealthy people, and a lot of the ranchers around Thacker Pass have expressed to us that they'll just sell their land
Oh,
and leave. They'll sell their water rights and leave. And we've already heard of that happening a little bit. And it's a brilliant strategy by the mining corporations, by the way. If they're going to get their mine in and they know that they're going to suck all the water out, and the ranchers know it's inevitable, then the ranchers think, well, I got to get mine. I'll sell my water rights and just move somewhere else. And then, you know, the water suck just gets worse and worse and worse.
It's also interesting because there's a lot of work in the last few years in the community rights world has been around water in one way or the other, and there's a pushes in some different places now on how to really protect watersheds in a broader way. And of course, when you get into that realm, you immediately get into the way that current water law operates, and it's almost like how powerful language can be to sort of paint us into a corner. In the labor world, the anti-labor laws are called right to work laws, right? Yet how do you like combat right to work? And sort of in that same vein, we call them water rights, but they're really water privileges, of which then get to be sold like commodities. And you spoke earlier about that the amount of water that would go away undermines so much of the reality of what water is needed. Clearly we're seeing globally. In fact, just before we got on, there was some article that came out about the Colorado River Compact, and all the water that was promised to all these different entities was water that never existed. And clearly now we see that it actually literally doesn't exist. So again, just another great example of, a frightening example of how disconnected we are from the real world, and how we see water as a thing, as a commodity. Where in the case you just described, someone has, a senior or junior water right, they can just, fuck it, I'll sell it. As if somehow, who gave you dominion in that way? But clearly our legal system has said, well, you have that power. Yet it's so disassociated from reality. Like, that's that kind of relational piece again. Like, how do we have a different relationship to water? I'm sure, like you said earlier, you had this immerse project you were in with the Ohio River, and interestingly enough, you're around the river, and then now you're thrust into a high desert environment, which is clearly there's water, but it's a different association to water. So I'm wondering if you've thought about water a lot in just your reality of the last couple of years, even.
Well, it's I mean, yeah, I mean, I guess the first thing to say about this objectification of nature, that I think we have to understand that this objectification of nature was a necessary shift in human cultures that preceded the problems that we're experiencing today. 10,000 years ago, every traditional culture, every human culture on Earth understood and practiced similar beliefs to the notion that the natural world is full of our kin, is full of other beings that we should respect and honor. Many of these cultures actually taught that humans were, in a way, inverted the hierarchy and said human beings are the lowest in the world because we have so much to learn from all these other creatures. And these cultures taught the sacredness of the relationships that we have with the natural world and all of these other beings. And it, in order to, before humans could in good conscience start destroying the natural world, they had to silence the voice of the natural world. They had to turn the natural world into an object. I think we understand this more and more within human relationships, You know, I think we saw for the last 100 years that if you want to destroy a people, first you have to demonize those people. You have to make them less than human. You have to turn them into objects so that you can destroy them en masse. And that all happened. We did that in our cultures. These dominant agricultural civilized cultures that grew up, they're all premised in the objectification of nature and premised in the notion that the natural world is only composed of objects that exist for human use. And water, of course, is one of the first, had to be one of the first beings. You know, if you think of water as her own being, or rivers and streams as their own beings, we had to objectify them in order to dam them and create, you know, diversion canals for agriculture. And so I think there's something, you know, there. Water is one of those great unifiers that if you can convince people that water is an object, then you can grow a whole economy off of that. If you can convince people that water is sacred, then you can grow a whole healthy, sane, sustainable culture out of that. And all of these weird abstractions like acre feet of water, you know, how many millions of gallons of water, these are all, you know, this is an objectification of living, moving, flowing water. And, you know, water is life, whether we're talking about the Ohio River, or if we're talking about water in the Great Basin, and especially in dry places like Northern Nevada, you know, water is clearly life. And you know, the dominant culture and the dominant economy has to objectify that, and then convince the rest of us that this objectification is totally natural, in order to do what it does.
If people haven't tracked, there's some things in chat that have been thrown in. There was a nice piece by Kimberly talking about Moby Dick, and kind of a lot of parallels to what we're covering here tonight. Another comment by Tish. And then there's a question that came in from Nancy, asking you, Will, if there was anything in particular that you would sort of ask or challenge or request to people here tonight. She says here, one action from the people here tonight. What would that be?
I would, the very first thing I would ask everyone to do is to look into their own heart and resist asking the question when faced with all of the darkness in the world, with all of the urgencies that we're facing. Resist the temptation to ask yourself only, what can I do? And instead look into your heart and ask what needs to be done. What would it take to create the world that you really want to live in? And suspend your disbelief about whether that's possible, or suspend your disbelief about what it would take to do that. Suspend all those voices in your head that have told you that you can't do this, that you're not strong enough, that we're not strong enough, that we don't have the power to do it. And take a really, really honest, and I always say sober, because a really, really honest, mature look at what needs to happen for us to return Earth to the flourishing, thriving home that she really is, and ask yourself what needs to be done, and start to think about how you can fit into the answer to that question, what needs to be done, and really think about just this whole notion that we're losing so much today that we're never going to get back. There are beings that are being destroyed right now that will never be seen again on the face of Earth. And if that isn't the most existential crisis, the most serious existential crisis that Earth has ever seen, I don't know what is. And we need to start living like that's the existential crisis that we're in. So I would just ask everyone to ask what needs to be done and how do I arrange my life to fit into that.
Have you seen a manifestation of that of an individual or individuals in the Thacker Pass world? I mean, does anyone come to mind that's sort of, I guess, living what you've just requested of everyone here? And if not, that's fine. I was just curious.
I mean, there are plenty of examples, more serious examples of people doing this. You know, in Thacker Pass, thank God is so far that we haven't, there hasn't been any huge construction taking place. We haven't gotten to the place where we have to have a serious confrontation with those forces. But yeah, there's been, connected with the Thacker Pass campaign, actually, let me revise this and say that, yes, in 1865, on September 12th, 1865, 70 Paiute men, women, and children were massacred by federal soldiers in Thacker Pass. This was part of what was called the Snake War. And the Snake War was a war that was fought when European settlers, European American settlers, started invading the Great Basin, specifically for mining. Silver and gold mining was a big thing in the 1860s. And we're not usually taught in American history, like, how come those Native Americans fought back so hard? Well, there's lots of documented, interviews with the people who fought in that war. The soldiers at the time knew exactly what that war was being fought for, and it was being fought to open up that land for mining. So in 1865, 70 people paid the ultimate price to stop mining in Thacker Pass. And here we are in 2022, and we're trying to figure out how we can, write the most clever lawsuit that we can. We're trying to figure out what, and I'm including myself in all this. I'm trying to figure out the best talk that I could give tonight for Thacker Pass. Well, in 1865, there were, Native Americans living on their ancestral lands. They'd been there for 12,000 years. And they were willing to literally fight to stop the destruction of that place. And they failed, and Nevada will never be the same. And if we continue to fail, none of these places are ever going to be the same.
Yeah, thanks for, in a way, putting a face to those people that obviously our system has worked very, very hard to make sure we're never even really known to those outside, perhaps, of their own relatives. Will, thanks a lot. I mean, I think we all wish we would be convening under happier and different circumstances, but we're in the world we're in, and I found tonight's time with you really, really, really helpful in a lot of ways. Mainly just lots of good thoughts going through my head about where to go and doing really the best we can based on what you said earlier in the sense of the actions we have to take. So really appreciate it. Appreciate everyone being here tonight. Thanks to the ORCRN for hosting this venue. Yeah, we'll be having more of these, so stay tuned. If you're not on the ORCRN's email list, please go to the website and sign up. Again, thank you all, and Will, thank you very much. I don't know if you have any final comments before we sign off.
Yeah, I just wanted to say thank you very much for having me. And, I understand too that so many of you are doing amazing work to defend the places that you love. I am so grateful for the work that everyone's doing. I'm often very critical of our movement as a whole. And I just, but I also feel a lot of gratitude for everyone that's trying to do everything that they can. And I hope that we can be critical of our movements, while also being proud that we are here fighting. I just want to communicate my gratitude to everyone for being here tonight, and for all the tremendous work that everyone's doing.
Well, thanks again, Will. Thanks again, everyone. Have a great evening.